So I'm writing a novel. It's the show where you join me, Oliver Brackenbury, on the journey of writing my next novel, from first ideas all the way to publication and promotion. In this one-man reality show, I'll share with you my ever-evolving thoughts and feelings on how I write, being a writer, and everything that entails at each stage of the process. I'll also answer listener questions and, sometimes, interview special guests. If you're the kind of person who likes to learn how things are made and get to know the people making them, then this is the show for you. Though not every author does it, it's fair to say it's pretty traditional for writers to begin their experience with publishing by submitting, instead of a novel to a publisher, submitting short stories to a literary magazine. While certainly not what I would call easy, short stories are a lot less work to write just by sheer volume, right, than a novel. And they're a lot less effort to submit. You just don't write big long query letters for short stories the way you do for novels. The turnaround on finding out whether or not you were rejected is pretty much always much faster than with a novel or a sample of a novel. You don't generally send the whole thing. And so the whole process can be very valuable in your development as a writer and giving you a much quicker sort of run through of creating, critiquing, sending out, getting rejected maybe, absorbing feedback maybe, or getting accepted, hurrah, and building yourself some credibility that may help you sell your novel when you inevitably want to write one of those. Literary magazines are also great for readers because you can sample a whole bunch of different authors and you can enjoy a complete story likely in one sitting at a time. Even if only with the cover art, although there is a long tradition of rich black and white interior illustrations and even the occasional color plate, literary magazines are also a great way of being exposed to a variety of artists. And genre magazines, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, that kind of thing, are notorious for having all kinds of creative, crazy stuff in them. If this isn't your first episode of the show, then odds are pretty decent you've heard me mention a couple of these magazines. Tales from the Magician's Skull and Whetstone, the amateur magazine of sword and sorcery, are both wonderful magazines of sword and sorcery fiction. There are many others. I, for example, am a fan of Analog, a hard science fiction magazine with the longest uninterrupted run of any literary magazine ever. And then you have literary magazines in another form. For example, there is a family of podcasts underneath the umbrella of the Escape Artists group. They have Pseudopod for horror, Podcastle for fantasy, Escape Pod for science fiction. You get the idea. And yeah, instead of a traditionally printed and bound magazine, the way they do it is having little podcast readings of the stories. I myself have not submitted as many tales to short story magazines as I would have liked, though I'm working to correct that as much as I can without neglecting the novel, which is itself a huge body of short stories that, depending on what I do with publication, I may submit a few stories to magazines. So yeah, anyway, magazines are on my mind, and I would like to learn more about them. Lo and behold, a guest of the show from episode 30, Nathaniel Webb, surprised me by not too long after he was on here for our story consultation episode where I edited one of his short stories live for you, the listener. He announced he was founding a literary magazine. It's called Wyngraf, and as he describes it on the website, Wyngraf is a magazine of cozy fantasy. Wyngraf was founded to promote and encourage fantasy stories that focus on the little things: friends, family, home, travel. Our authors create worlds that readers get lost in and dream of someday visiting. We believe in the power of escapism. Genre fiction can and should be used to address injustice, give voice to the voiceless, and stir up change. There is also, however, a space for fiction to comfort us and bring us a momentary respite from the challenges of the everyday world. Well, that's the short website pitch, but let's go a little deeper, huh? In fact, why don't we talk to Nathaniel right now? And here I am with Nat. Hey, man.
Hey, how's it going, Oliver?
Pretty well. I have been looking forward to this conversation because I know that moving forward with the podcast, I want to talk to more people involved with the publishing businessy side of writing. And I like that I can have someone on that I've already had on before who I wasn't expecting to have you on again, to be honest, anytime soon. But then you went and did something really interesting. So that's on you. You've decided to found a literary magazine, and I would love to talk about that with you today.
Yeah, I did it all to get invited back, man. It's my bucket list. Number one is to be friend of a podcast, and I think you have to be 3 times, right, to be friend of the podcast, Nathaniel Webb. I don't know the laws of podcasting, but yeah, I'm gunning for you.
People on the Twitter account friend of the podcast, just because I like them. So,
friend of Oliver, that works too.
That's all it takes. Just smile at me and I'll be your friend.
There you go.
Which is funny because listener, I can't actually see Nat's face using a
Yeah,
webcam on this
I
computer.
don't have a webcam. I am smiling right now, though, I assure you.
All right, well, I'll take your word for it. So, all right, let's get into it. Where does the name, I'm going to mispronounce this probably, Wyngraf?
Yeah, that's how I pronounce it. I think probably my Anglo-Saxon professor from college would hit me with a ruler if she heard that. So sorry, Amy. But yeah, Wyngraf is how I'm saying it. It comes from the Clark Hall Concise Anglo-Saxon Dictionary. But really, yeah, really where it came from. So, I was thinking, okay, I'm making this magazine of cozy fantasy. Obviously, huge inspiration is Tolkien, particularly The Hobbit, right? And he, of course, was a linguist, specifically an Old English Anglo-Saxonist, whatever you want to call that. And he took a lot of Anglo-Saxon words, and I won't get into the whole like Tolkien is linguist thing, but he took a lot of Anglo-Saxon words for stuff in Hobbit language, whatever you want to call it. Their kind of peculiar phrases. So like, what's a good example? Matham, which is like the Hobbit. It's almost like a white elephant gift if you're a Hobbit. It's something you don't want, but you don't want to throw it out. And so you're kind of not sure what to do with it. And Hobbits, on their birthdays, they would have these big parties and give out Mathams to all the people who came to the party. So instead of getting birthday presents, they give out these things that like nobody actually really wants. But that comes from an Old English word, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but matham, basically, which means like a precious thing or precious gift. Or the Hobbit word for the Hobbit hole, as we call it, is smile, which comes from an Old English word, smuggle, something like that, but that means like burrow. So he would pluck out these Anglo-Saxon words and kind of update them in a way to get these really warm, cozy sounding Hobbit words. And so I wanted to try to do something like that, something in that tradition. And so I kind of, went through my old Anglo-Saxon dictionary from college. And long story short, I came upon this word Wyngraf or Wyngraf, however you want to
Wyngraf?
however it's pronounced. Yeah. I seem to recall the Y is kind of like an sound, but I just say Wyngraf. And it means wondrous grove, essentially, delightful grove, which I thought, that's kind of like a cozy, safe place, right? This nice grove of trees. And you can imagine yourself sitting in there reading a book, and it's very quiet and peaceful and safe. And I like the idea that a grove is something that's more than the sum of its parts. It's a stand of trees, but it also, the trees come together and they create this kind of safe space. And I also managed to work in a modern English pun in there, of course, because graph is editor slang for paragraph, GRAF. Oh, yeah. So it's also like wondrous paragraph. So yeah, once I hit on that kind of trio of wordplay, I was like, that's it. I found it.
Okay, that's pretty good. And honestly, even if I didn't know any of that, it is just like a pleasing word to say and also feels like fantasy-ish, certainly from a Eurocentric perspective.
Exactly.
Were there any others you had in mind? Like Hot Cup of Cocoa with Goblins? Was that a title you considered? I don't know.
That I should have used that, man. I'm going to take that for my next magazine. No, I came within spitting distance of a different Old English word, homeward, which I really liked because it sounds like homeward, as in heading home. But the actual definition is somebody who keeps guard at sea. So it's weird or ward, like, warden or a warding spell, something like that. And I really liked that. And I almost went with it. And then I realized nobody's going to be able to pronounce this and nobody's going to be able to spell it. I mean, it's the Old English word is HOLMWEARD. And I just thought, how ungoogleable could I possibly make this magazine?
Yeah.
So I scrapped that at the last second, and luckily I found Wyngraf not long after that, and I thought, all right, that's about 100 times better.
Yeah, it's funny the Googling effect on naming, which I suppose is well documented and has been with us for over 20 years, but still, you got to think about it. When I was naming this podcast, when I came to, so I'm writing a novel, I was like, okay, I like that phrase for a bunch of reasons I won't get into because we're interviewing you about your thing, but I did sort of just check when I Googled it. I was like, that's the beginning of a phrase. Is this going to be as bad to find as if I name the podcast? Is it a tumor or just some other something people will
should have
Google
gone with that.
financial advice, the podcast, or I don't know, whatever.
It's funny, like if you Google cozy fantasy, I mean, this is I won't try to jump ahead too much, but this is part of why I started this magazine. If you Google cozy fantasy, at least right now, you get a lot of like Reddit threads of people asking like, what is cozy fantasy? What are some books I should read if I want fantasy that's cozy? And like random, like, I don't know, Yahoo groups and all this. Just there's no website for cozy fantasy. And last time I checked, we're still not even on the front page, despite the fact that I actually own cozyfantasy.com, which points to the Wyngraf website. That was not
Nice.
even taken. And I just snagged it. And Google doesn't seem to want to respect me. But yeah, so again, if I just called it like Cozy Fantasy Magazine, that probably would not be Googleable, at least not right now.
Huh. Well, speaking of which, I have yammered about this a little bit in the introduction, but it's best heard from your mouth, I believe. Could you please define for us cozy fantasy? And also, there's sort of like a subterm or maybe adjacent term that you mentioned on the website, backpack fantasy?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with cozy, and it's a challenge because it means something different to everybody. And it makes me think there's sort of that pithy saying like the golden age of science fiction is when you're 12 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in a lot of ways, cozy fantasy is kind of whatever you have nostalgia for that you grew up reading and makes you feel safe and warm when you go back to it. And for a lot of people, that's Tolkien, and I tend to agree with that. But for a lot of people, it's not. So whatever it means, though, there is definitely a movement afoot. I mean, there's a lot of interest growing on the internet in cozy fantasy, and people are just, I think, starting to really say like, hey, this is turning into something that's its own genre with its own, not rules, but its own sort of tropes and concepts and themes and that sort of thing. And that's, I think, ultimately what it's about to me is the themes of home and community, a focus on interpersonal relationships, personal growth, often a focus on nature. Food is a big one. I love writing about food. I also love eating it, but I love writing about it.
So I'm guessing you've enjoyed a few Redwall novels because
Yes, exactly. That's such a touchstone. I mean, The Hobbit and Redwall are kind of like the two 10,000-pound gorillas in the room when you talk about cozy. And it's creating a setting that the reader wants to live in. I mean, as popular as George R. R. Martin or Robert E. Howard or whatever, nobody wants to live in Westeros. Nobody wants to go back to the Hyborian age and like get kidnapped and sold to a trader caravan or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not so much, no.
Yeah, but you want to live in a hobbit hole. You want to live at Redwall and go to those feasts, right? So that's a big part of it. And then generally, I think just lower stakes. It's not big, epic, world-ending quests. It can be as low stakes as just a slice of life, where there's almost no conflict at all. And often kind of coming along with that, there's low or no violence. Personally, I actually love action. And we've talked about sword and sorcery, which is
I mean, you and I met through the sword and sorcery scene, which I do find kind of amusing that you were like, I'm founding a literary magazine. And I was like, oh yeah. And you're like, cozy as fuck.
Yeah.
I mean,
No
people
blood
could like
or
very
guts.
different things, but it's just an amusing like counterpoint to, blood and thunder.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I only like the extremes. Don't give me anything in the middle. It should either be heads exploding and guts spilling, or it should be like serving tea to the Duchess, and nothing in between. Yeah. But in cozy, personally, my definition, and actually some people disagree with this. There are some people who want no violence in their story at all. But to me, it needs to be serving a higher purpose. It shouldn't be the point of the story. It should be for some reason. And you read The Hobbit or you read the Redwall books, and there's plenty of action in both of those.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all in defense of something greater, usually in defense of the home.
Oh, cool. Okay, so how about backpack fantasy then? What's the difference, or is there one?
Yeah, so this is, I assumed this was a thing, and the more I look around and try to Google it, I think I may have actually invented this, which I'm sure now that I've said that on the internet, someone will tell me I'm wrong, and I hope they do. But to me, backpack fantasy is cozy stories that are specifically more about traveling or adventuring, about getting out on the road, leaving home rather than staying home. So like there's a tabletop RPG that came from Japan called Ryotama, which is all about basically like you go on an adventure on the road. And again, there's some action, you can battle goblins or whatever, but it's about sort of the personal growth that you get from travel. And to me, it's about the wonder of nature, learning lessons out in the wilderness, that kind of thing. And there's an aesthetic to it as well. I think of like, I don't know, the Dragon Quest video games where, you're out in the wild, but it's very bright and colorful, appealing, or like Breath of the Wild, the Zelda game,
Yep.
So a lot of the sort of landscapes where you've opened up a whole new territory and you get sort of that sweeping panoramic shot and you think like, man, I wish I could go there in real life. That to me is backpack.
Okay, yeah, kind of like giving you some awe and wonder, but not
Yeah.
in the sense of like a Clark Ashton Smith, Suffolk,
Yeah.
awe and wonder at giant skeletons marching across sand-blasted wastelands.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're playing Elden Ring and you open up a new zone, you go, oh shit. But if you're playing Breath of the Wild and you open up a new zone, you go, oh man, this is awesome.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, so something you've made me think of while talking about this is something I brought up quite a bit in earlier episodes of the podcast, and as a listener, bless you, you may remember. Have you ever read Ursula K. Le Guin's Steering the Craft?
Yes, I read it a couple years ago.
Okay, because there's a part on page 123, I've got my copy in front of me
Oh
here,
my God, your memory is
where she
incredible.
talks about how like conflict is one kind of behavior and it's all good, but people sometimes in their very screenwritery way, I find,
Hmm.
whether or not they're writing screenplays, it's a very screenwritery thing to just become obsessed with conflict. It's like the only driver.
Hmm.
And she's like, she says, quote, conflict is one kind of behavior. There are others equally important in any human life, such as relating, finding, losing, bearing, as in to bear a burden, I suppose,
Hmm.
discovering, parting, and changing. And yeah, I guess I was just wondering if that was something that might have been on your mind with this, because I try to keep that list handy
Hmm.
when I'm reviewing a story and just be like, do I have anything else other than people just like butting heads?
Yeah, man, that's fantastic. I don't have that as an explicit touchstone, but I think as with so many things in life, Ursula Le Guin is smarter than I am and said it much better than I could. And that's a great example. And I'm going to go into my copy and find that page because I mean, I couldn't have put it better. There's much more to life than conflict, and there's much more to life than having a goal and then something prevents you from getting that goal. And that's what drives the scene, right?
Speaking of those books you mentioned, that
Yeah.
get people in when they're young, when did your love of cozy fantasy develop?
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it, right? Is the golden age of fantasy for me was I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and my dad, who was away a lot with work, he'd be gone when I woke up in the morning. A lot of times he would not come home until I was asleep at night, that kind of thing. He'd go on a lot of business trips, but when he was home and I was awake, he was reading me Redwall, and my dad was an amateur actor in college and after. And so, of course, he did all the voices. His his mole accent, his Scottish mole accent is, I mean, chef's kiss. But, I mean, just, I would curl up with him and he would just read me, and these are dense books. Like I've tried to read them to my own kid and he's like, Dad, this is super boring. Maybe we all had better attention spans back in 1990 or whatever. But, I mean, he would just read to me for hours. And so I think that's where it started. But I didn't really realize how much I loved cozy fantasy until this was probably in college, but I was rereading Fellowship of the Ring. And, that begins somewhat famously with the concerning hobbits section, where it's like, now J.R.R. Tolkien will give you an info dump about his favorite thing that he's invented before the actual story starts. And normally those are absolutely dreadful, right? I mean, we're always told, like, cut that shit out of your fantasy novel. But man, like, I realized that's my favorite part of that book. And I was very sad when it ended and the actual story began. And so I thought, okay, there's something going on here. And then just to bring it all around, really, I started focusing on it about a year ago, a little over a year ago, kind of early 2021. Pandemic still raging, nobody was vaccinated yet. And I had actually just come out of a major surgery at the end of 2020, where they took out a big chunk of what was inside me. And there were complications. I was in the hospital for like 2.5 weeks. Apparently there was a day or two where it was actually kind of touch and go. And the book I brought to the hospital was a Walter John Williams book, and he's best known as a sci-fi writer. But I think his first novels that were published was a series of naval fiction called Privateers and Gentlemen, and they're very dense, super serious, heavy themes with like death and religion and the American Revolution and all this stuff. And I was just like, man, I just almost died. Like, I need to read something that makes me feel better rather than worse. Like, they're great books, but oh my God, it's like, I just picked the wrong thing to bring to the hospital. And so it was kind of during that recovery that I was like, people are probably writing like nice books somewhere and I should try to find those.
Okay, so that's when you started, connecting with that, and then was it shortly
Yeah.
after that experience when you found Talk of It online, this sort of burgeoning scene you
Yeah.
described?
So I was still on Reddit then, and this was, as I mentioned before, every once in a while, people will ask on Reddit, what are some fantasy books with a cozy feel? And so that's exactly where I went, was to those threads and those recommendations.
Has anybody claimed r/cozy fantasy yet?
That's actually a great question. I don't know that I want to take on moderating a Reddit subreddit, but I don't know. Maybe not.
I don't know. Maybe it might be fun to grab if you can convince
Yeah.
someone else to moderate it. Although, I mean, how busy would it be to start? I don't know.
Yeah, probably if there are 0 people, it wouldn't take much to moderate it. But
You never know. That could be kind of fun. If you could claim that sort of for your magazine and yourself, like that'd be pretty cool.
yeah,
But yeah, anyway, well, okay. And to bring over to the magazine side of things,
yeah,
I'm wondering, sometimes people rightly complain, I think, that literary magazines, particularly the smaller ones, in fact, basically the smaller ones, but still, they get a lot of submissions from authors, probably more submissions than readers sometimes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the authors are primarily, they just submit. They have no relationship to the magazine. They haven't read it, or maybe they read one issue to get an idea for it.
Yep.
So I'm going to sound old gatekeepery when I ask you, the editor of a new magazine, what literary magazines do you read regularly? Charlie?
Yeah. So right now, I regularly read Tales from the Magician's Skull and Whetstone for my sword and sorcery fix.
Mm-hmm.
And there is actually a new market, it's Canadian, actually, so well done you, called Tails and Feathers. They just did a Kickstarter, and they are also a cozy fantasy market, but they're doing, I think it's purely digital, and then maybe they'll do a collection at the end of the year. But they're doing basically like one story a month because they wanted to pay pro rates, which we'll get into the numbers later, I'm sure.
Yes.
But I'm really, really excited for that one to start publishing because I think it's going to be awesome. And honestly, like I'm looking for more magazines to support, because I only recently have really gotten into short stories, sort of starting with the sword and sorcery stuff and then realizing like, oh, actually, I really like reading short stories. This is great. But, the big name magazines, the ones that actually still get sold on bookstore shelves, they're much more in the sort of literary sci-fi, literary fantasy vein, which, I think there's a lot of great stuff being written, but that's not really my thing. I like pulps, I like high fantasy, I like space opera. I want my genre to be like genre stories.
Not so much like analogs hard sci-fi, which
right,
is lovely,
exactly.
but it doesn't sound
exactly
with what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, like I'm open to suggestions because I want to start buying more magazines, to support them and just to find more stuff that I like. Because, there are so many amazing writers out there. And it's true. I mean, the joke is, what do they say? Like most fiction magazines, the only people who read them are writers who want to get published in that magazine, right? I got to put my money where my mouth is and start trying to change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, also you have added motivation to find more talent, right? To
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you remember your first ever literary mag submission to sort of turn the table around here?
Oh God, yes. This is an embarrassing story purely because of my emotional response to it. And so the first story I ever submitted was actually into an anthology because I did not understand the difference, I guess, between an anthology and a magazine. But a place called Pulp Mill Press, an editor named Sean Robeson was putting together an anthology, and they were looking for fantasy stories basically. I sent in actually sort of a proto sword and sorcery story. I had just read Norval Page's Sons of the Bear God, which is actually a terrific sort of lost gem of sword and sorcery. But I was very inspired by that, wrote a story, sent it in, got rejected. But Sean, the editor, was actually, extremely kind and thoughtful. He wrote me a very long email rejection, basically saying, we're not going to take it, but you've got some promise, and here's a long list of things that I think could be improved in this story, if you wanted to rewrite it and make it something that could be saleable someday. And so I got that email and I thought, oh my God, this guy is listing every single way I failed. Because this is my first submission ever. And so I didn't understand, what a mitzvah that is, that he took so much time to give me this really detailed and generous advice. And now, of course, I would kill to get that kind of feedback from every editor that rejects me.
Now you're like, oh, one sentence, not for us, thanks, bye.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but so I just totally did not appreciate what he did for me. But so that was a weird and wonderful kind of first rejection. And I've racked up many more since then, but that one will always stay with me.
Okay, and like adjacent to that, do you remember the first literary mag you read? I think mine would have been Probably old analogs from the late 70s and early 80s that a friend of
Oh,
mine liked to dig out
nice.
of his dad's shelf.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, gosh, aside from like highlights for children, probably Dragon magazine, the old D&D magazine, the official one, they used
Yeah.
to publish a lot of short fiction and, a lot of stuff from like Gardner Fox and I think maybe even Fritz Leiber had a story or two published in Dragon
Oh yeah,
sort of
well,
at the end of
actually, not
days.
just Fritz Leiber, but oh no, I'm gonna lose my nerd cred here.
No.
Gatekeepers, keep away from me. The guy he co-created Path and Grey Master with.
Harry Otto Fisher.
Thank you. Harry Otto
Yep.
Fisher got a story there in the late 70s where he finished his original idea for kind of an origin story for Mouser that
Oh,
was very
interesting.
different from the published one and
Nice.
sort
I
of
actually didn't
threaded
know
into
that.
the grand narrative. But yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So that was probably it because I grew up playing tons of D&D and read Dragon magazine religiously. So that was probably it. I think I read like the magazine of science fiction and fantasy or magazine of fantasy and science fiction
Yeah,
for a while in
yeah.
college. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I really only seriously got into short stories recently, kind of rediscovering Sword and Sorcery and then realizing like, oh, wait, this is actually an excellent format for telling stories, which everybody in the world has known for hundreds of years except me, obviously. But there it
Wow, I
is.
mean, I think we all kind of have to rediscover it because they're not pushed very much outside of English class when you're
Yeah,
growing up,
no.
unless
Yeah,
you
that's
have like
really
that friend or
true.
that uncle or whatever.
Yeah, you think of like you get your big anthology of the stories you must read in high school English, and then like that's all short stories are for most people, which is a shame because there's so
Yeah.
many different subgenres that are all really well represented.
Yeah. Meanwhile, is this your first crack at launching a literary magazine, or are there some like flaming wrecks in the backyard you don't like to talk about?
No, the only flaming wreck is in my future.
Oh no! Oh no!
No, yes, this is my first one. I have no idea what I'm doing, but really, what it came out of was last year I self-published a novel for the first time. I've got a handful of novels out, most of them with small presses, but I wrote this one that actually it's a cozy mystery, not fantastical, although it's set at a science fiction convention. But I shopped it around
What's
a
it
little
called?
bit. It's called A Conventional Murder.
And where can people buy it?
It's on Amazon. If you search for A Conventional Murder, Nathaniel Webb,
Okay.
it will come up, I promise. Yeah, and I wrote it, and honestly, I thought it was great, but I didn't get any bites from agents or presses or anything, and so I thought, well, I'll just put it out into the world, And what I discovered was I actually really loved all the technical aspects of self-publishing, like commissioning art, doing the cover, doing the interior layout, getting the files ready for ebook and printing and all that stuff. I actually really enjoyed doing it, and then of course at the end, you hold that thing in your hands, and you're like, I made this. It's very satisfying. And so after that, I thought like, gosh, I really want to self-publish more stuff because I really enjoy doing that. And I didn't have another novel to stick out there. And so I thought, well, I've got all these kind of skills that I built up now. I can use them to help other people, and I'm not going to like tell somebody to send me their novel and I'm going to publish it. I don't have that kind of power in the world. But I thought, gosh, I could just get a magazine together. I can pay writers, support other people that way, and kind of try to lift up a genre that I really love.
Okay, so how long was the process from like first ideas, thinking this up through to the imminent release of issue number 1? What were like the different stages of the process?
Obviously I had been pondering it for a long time, but when I decided to pull the trigger was probably like mid-January of this year, and our first issue comes out May 1st. So it was way faster than I expected, honestly. And partially that's just my personality. Like when I decide to do something, I'm just going to do it, I see no reason to wait around. But yeah, I mean, I started in January. I built the website, put together the submission guidelines to try to start defining what exactly I was looking for. Because again, cozy fantasy, it hasn't been pinned down yet, and it means something different to everybody. And so I wanted to really sort of stake that flag of like, here's what I mean by it. So I spent some time getting that description together. From there, I think the next thing I did was really just trying to get the word out. Once I had the website and the submission page, getting the word out about submissions. I said, okay, I'm going to open submissions on March 1st. So, people have time to put stories together and stuff. Like I was ready to start reading, but, I figured I'd give people time if they're going to write something, if they want to, edit something that they've already got, whatever.
Well, and especially as someone who has been on the writer side many times by this point, I believe, right? It's that kind of thing of like how much you as the editor, like I want to read stories now, but you want to give people a chance to create a new work. It's, especially
Right,
with it
exactly.
a young genre, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to kind of slow myself down, and say like, okay, I can't just start accepting stuff now because that's not fair to the writers. But yeah, I started getting the word out. I got on places like Rallin.com. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but I don't know if it's a market listing site, Duotrope, Submission Grinder, all those places. There's a Facebook group called Open Call that I had used in the past as an author. So I posted there. And then, yeah, March 1st rolled around, started taking submissions. I meant to only have submissions for a week, but then I forgot to change the submissions page to say closed on March 8th. So stuff kept coming in and I was like, man, these people are not paying attention to the instructions. And then I went and looked at the instructions. So everything that came in late, I just emailed everybody and I said, like I screwed up and I'm going to hold this for issue 2. I'm not even going to look at it now. Do what you want with it until then. But if it's still out there, I'll read it, when we're doing issue 2. But yeah, so I mean, we got, I think it was 73 was the final number of submissions considered for issue 1, came in that week. I gave myself until the end of May to read them all and respond, or mid-May. And honestly, like they started coming in and I just wanted to read them all. And so I just read stories as they came in, because I was just having a blast doing it. And there was so much great stuff coming in. And so, I had final decisions made and everybody emailed probably a week or 2 after the submission window closed, because the stuff was coming in. I was going, okay, this isn't going to work. Or, I really like this, but if something else with a similar theme comes along, maybe I can't take this right now because I don't want 2 stories that are too similar, that kind of stuff. But, by the time the submission window closed, I basically read everything. And so it was just a matter of making those final decisions and sending all the emails. Meanwhile, I did the cover commission with my amazing artist, and she actually worked super fast. So I had that. I think that was in probably by the time the submissions window was closed. I had the final version of the cover art and I was working on my own story. I decided, honestly, partially it's just a money saving measure. I included one of my own stories in the first issue because that's like 7,000 words that I don't have to pay for, but you're still getting a full magazine out of it. So saved a couple bucks there.
Well, you're not being cheeky like Lynn Carter, who I think occasionally would put 2 of his stories in an anthology, and you're like,
right, yeah, and then he put one of them under a pseudonym. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. And I considered putting it under a pseudonym, and I thought, no, if I'm going to do this, I'll take responsibility for my actions. So it's there under my name.
Actually, if I can interrupt you for a second, because that kind of plays into something I've thought of while you were talking. When you mentioned specific numbers of submissions and stuff like that, one thing I really respected, and certainly is spiritually akin to, I hope, my approach to this podcast and me and my novel project. You're very transparent. You've been posting blog posts on Wyngraf.com or cozyfantasy.com if you want to do that. Yeah. Really breaking down like the numbers and the reasons for rejections and acceptances. And like, I think there were 2 ones you sent back with notes being like, okay, we can adjust this. Yeah. Did you ever see yourself doing it any other way? Or did you just from the get-go be like, I'm going to really show people behind the curtains, like no curtains pretty much?
Yeah, no, I always intended to have total transparency, and I was definitely inspired by this podcast, as well as, yeah, for sure. And there are other publishers and stuff who have done similar things of like, or if you do a Kickstarter, right, and they say, here's where every penny of the Kickstarter money went, and I love when places do that. I think it's very honest. I think it's very real. I think it's valuable for other people who either are interested in starting a magazine or just for the authors to understand, here's what we're working with. And, and I just always find those kinds of posts fascinating. So yeah, I always intended to just have total transparency. And now that we've got the issue nailed down, I think we'll probably talk about numbers later, but now that we've got the issue nailed down, I'm going to write up posts just saying, here's the entire budget for the issue. Here's where all the money went. Here's how much I did myself so I didn't have to pay anybody. And what that rolls into is here's how many copies of the magazine theoretically we have to sell to actually get all that money back. Cool.
And so, yeah, I think that's a really cool thing to do because I think it can cut down on the irritated messages you might get from writers who didn't get in. I mean, some people will be difficult no matter what you do, right? But I think it would cut it down. I think some people are reasonable and be like, oh, okay, well, I mean, they did get all those messages. Oh, and here's feedback on why and stuff,
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. And it's also nice because I think you can help take sort of advice you've been given in your writing career and kind of pay it forward in the sense that anybody else who down the road is like, I want to do a literary mag, maybe they'll take something of value from what you put up and you'll save them grief. And isn't that nice?
Yeah, absolutely. And man, I mean, I learned so much about writing just from going through the slush pile for this issue, because
Right.
if I'm going to reject something, I have to know why. I have to be able to justify to myself and to the person that I'm rejecting, why is this not working? And I really tried. I think I missed a couple of folks, and if I did, I'm sorry, but I really tried to give everybody some kind of personalized explanation for why their story was rejected. Whether it was, just prose mechanic stuff, or like, if you're going to send me, like, here's a horror story set in modern day America, like, I don't know why you'd send me that, but I'm not going to accept it.
I gather there's a small percentage of that in any magazine you do. I remember seeing Howard Andrew Jones talking about the Skull submissions, which they opened up last year, and they got, like, I don't know, a Garfield fanfic or something. Like, it just, like, you know what I mean?
I would buy a Garfield fanfic.
Well, good. I've already written it, but but you know what I mean? Like, if I don't know if it was literally that, but it was something that off the wall that just, like, somebody just saw that there was a magazine and an email address, and that's all they needed.
Exactly. Yeah, some people just clearly did not read the submission guidelines, but but those are the easy rejections to write, right? Partially because I know why it's not making it in, partially because somebody didn't have the respect for my time to read the submission
not too invested.
thing.
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, but there were some that it was very hard to pin down, like, this hits all the marks of, theme and setting that we're looking for. And there's nothing specifically that I can say, like, okay, they have this issue with their prose, or, this thing is wrong in the characterization or whatever. There are some things that it just didn't work. And those I really had to spend time sitting with and trying to pick apart, like, why is this not working for me? And man, I just learned so much.
I bet it, because when you have that feeling of just, like, it's just a vibe, like, you can say that to yourself when you're working on your own stuff, but it's, I mean, you can say it to other people. I've gotten a rejection like that. Didn't really say a vibe, but I'm just not feeling it. Is feedback I've gotten once or twice, but it's just very frustrating, because it'll be like, I liked 7 things and I just wasn't feeling it, and then I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Yeah,
exactly. You can't only say good things and then reject it.
Yeah, it's very odd. And have the rejection be predicated on, let's say, just a feeling. So, like, I applaud you for making that effort, because, as we both know, not everybody does. And, maybe if issue 2 gets, like, 700 submissions or something crazy, like, you won't be able
then I will have to
do that.
Yeah. I mean, this was possible because, I got about 10 stories a day. And so I was able to read them all and think about them all over a few weeks. But if it explodes, I'm not going to be able to keep doing that, unfortunately.
Okay, I really do want to get to my next question, which is about the financial side, but I want to unpack things that you've already said. So, for example, the cover art. First of all, what was the name of the artist? And I assume she has an Instagram?
Yes. So I'm going to spell it because I will probably horribly mispronounce it. Her Instagram is, now I don't want to misspell it.
You know what? Just say it as best you can, and I will link it to listener in the show notes and on the blog post and all that stuff.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, it's Samiligia, Samiligia. Her name is Samara Ligia. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, and I'm very sorry. But I mean, I found her when I was working on my old Humblefoot mysteries, which are the cozy fantasy mysteries I post on Kindle Vella. And she did my Kindle Vella icon, which was absolutely fantastic. I really, really enjoyed working with her. And so, when I went for the cover art for issue 1, I mean, I knew, I was like, all right, I'm going with her. And she knocked it out of the park. I mean, we did the cover reveal yesterday, I think, and we've gotten so much good feedback. People love this art. I mean, it's really fantastic.
Oh, awesome. And listener, if you're like, I want to see that, well, aside from Wyngraf.com, if you want to go to our website, somerunningnovel.com, it'll be in the blog post. But okay, cool. And did you, like, were you able to just sort of give her a brief description, or did you, like, a rough sketch and be like, draw this but with talent, or like how did that go?
No, I think if I gave a sketch to any artist, they would probably just immediately quit the project and never speak to me again.
Did you bodge some together out of, like, photo references, or?
I gave a couple of reference photos just for vibe. But this one, honestly, I mean, I really just said, like, I only had sort of the vaguest concept of what I wanted it to be. I gave her, it's a young woman in a white and purple uniform. She looks sort of like a ranger, D&D ranger, but less violence focused. She's a messenger, fantasy mail carrier, essentially.
Oh, was this the character from your story?
Yeah, so I gave myself the first cover story, and this was purely just egotistical thing. Going forward, I'm going to do covers based on one of the other stories in the issue. But this was, I jokingly say it was an egotistical thing. It was really because I needed to have it together in time to put the whole magazine together, and not knowing what other stories were going to come across the transom. But yeah, I mean, I really gave her a very vague description, and she just came up with something and just nailed it the first time. I was very lucky.
Oh, well, that means someone who's privileged to read an earlier draft of your story. I'm going to go back and look at that cover again after the interview, because
you'll see.
I really liked it, but now I can assign it to that character. That'll be kind of neat to revisit it.
Yeah. It's the part with the rain.
Enough about creativity, goddammit. Tell us about the cold hard cash, the financial side. Were there any grants involved? He said the Canadian.
I don't know that we do that in this country.
Yeah, I just realized as I said it out loud, I was like, oh yeah, right, America. But
Ulysses S. Grant on the $100 bill.
Whoa, nice.
I don't even know if that's right.
And also,
that's right.
I would like to ask, and I do not mean this remotely confrontationally, though, as I'm reading on my little Word file I've got open here, it might come across as such.
Okay.
Why not start off as an unpaid market and then offer payment once the magazine has gathered enough readership to pay for it? You started by paying people right off the bat, and I remember seeing it was Twitter or maybe the Western Discord, some goddamn online kiddie pool that we both swim in, where I saw you talking about how you were actually originally going to pay a little less, and then some people saw that and kind of griped, and you were like, well, okay, I'll see what I can do here, and you raised the pay, which I thought was very kind and bold of you.
Yeah, I didn't know I was allowed to start as an unpaid market. I didn't realize that was an option. No, no, there are no grants or anything. This is all completely out of my pocket. And I should be clear up front, like, I'm not really trying to make a killing off of this. My plan is if any issue turns a profit, that money's going to go back around and go back into the magazine. But this is not like my retirement plan or anything. But yeah, I mean, from the get-go, I never really thought, well, I'll just pay people nothing. Even something like Whetstone or Witch House, which are openly the amateur magazine of sword and sorcery, and it's an e-zine, it's given away for free. I mean, they still at least pay $10.
Yeah, like an honorary kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, I thought if I'm going to charge money for this, I should be paying everybody who's involved. And yeah, and you're right. So originally the budget was to pay 0.5 cent per word. I posted that on a Facebook group called Open Call, which is for submissions windows for genre fiction. And just, boy, I got a lot of heat for that. And in retrospect, rightly so, and this is lessons learned by me having no idea what I'm doing. In my mind, it's like, well, I'm doing the best I can, and 0.5 cent a word, it's not good, but it's not nothing, and man, I mean, people just raked me across the coals for that. And so I doubled the budget up to 1 cent per word, which is nowhere near a professional rate. I mean, nobody's going to make a living selling fiction at a penny per word. They haven't probably since Charles Dickens.
So I guess, I'm just doing some math in my head. I guess 0.5 cent a word, let's say a 5,000 word story, that'd be what?
$50.
$50, yeah.
Oh, sorry, 0.5 cent a word, yeah, it would be 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in a penny a word, it's 50. Yeah, and so, let me pull up the spreadsheet here. The total budget ultimately for this issue, $682.14, $250 for the cover art, and then $432.14 for all the stories. And that again, so the final word count is pretty much bang on 50K, but one of those stories is mine, and so I didn't pay myself for that. So 443,214 words that I paid for, and then a few more that I gave myself for free. And it was originally going to be less, but it was too low. And then everything else I just did myself. So all the layout, the website, I mean, I'm lucky to be a web developer professionally. So doing the website was no problem.
Yeah, the website's pretty tight. Did you do that WordPress? Did you?
Yeah, it's WordPress. Yeah. It's very easy to get something pretty slick looking on WordPress, which is really nice.
Yeah, we're not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
But I will say I also love that.
They should be.
It's I gotta say it's a lot better than I remember the first time I tried WordPress, like, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Yes, it's improved a lot. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well,
hang on. No, I do have more thoughts. Hang on.
No, that's fair. I mean, that's literally like all the dollars and cents. And so, like, how many issues do you want to put out a year? What's your goal there?
Oh my God. I mean, originally I was like, I'm going to do quarterly and I'm just always going to be working on this. And then I realized that was crazy. So the goal right now is to do 2 issues a year, because when I'm working on it, I want to go whole hog, guns blazing, put everything I've got into it. But then I'd need to recharge, then I need to do other things for a while, work on other genres, work on my own writing, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
but I know, come like end of summer, probably I'm going to start getting antsy again and want to make another one. And so that's the plan right now, is probably late summer, do another submission window. I'm going to have a little time between semesters of school, actually. So I'll probably do it then. So I'll have a lot of time to read.
You're an animal, man. You're working, you're going to school, you have a kid.
And I have a 6-year-old.
You're writing stuff that isn't this, and also you're
Yeah.
doing this. So I think 2 issues a year is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm only happy if I have something to do. So
oh no, I same, and I admire you for learning a lesson like before you started, in terms of how much you felt you could handle. Like when I started this podcast, I knew off the bat I was going to try and do more than I probably would be sustainable in the long run, because that's
yes.
just who I am. And I think a lot of people when they start projects, because that's, you're so excited, you want to do 50,000 updates a week, whatever. And absolutely, by the end of the last year, I was like, okay, cool it, hotshot, 2 updates a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that you didn't have to go through that experience, you were able to be like, yeah, okay, no, I think 2's good.
Yeah. Because it is. I'm loving it, but it's a huge amount of work.
It's nice though. I mean, do you see yourself like longer term building, like, I don't know, like, do you maybe you haven't thought about any of this, and nor do you have to, but maybe you have. Do you see yourself with setting a goal of like, if I can do 20 issues, that's great, or if I can do 5, anything past that is gravy, like?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question.
Or do enough issues for like a collection that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I definitely down the line want to have enough stuff published that then we can put together collections. For which I would pay the authors a second time, just to be clear. It's in their contracts. I'm only buying one type of rights right now. But yeah, we've already, we've gotten so many great dragon stories. I really want to do like the Wyngraf dragon book and just put the best dragon stories in it, that kind of thing. Definitely is a goal of mine. As far as number of issues, I don't know, until I get sick of it, until I die. I don't know. We'll really have to see. Have to see.
Like, it's way too early in a way for me to be asking that. On the other hand, I have known so many people, including myself at times, who set pretty ambitious goals. Like, they're just like, I'm going to go for this. I did a web series years ago, and I at times regret the fact that I kept this commitment, because I wonder what else I could have done with all that time and energy. But whatever. I did a web series where I committed to doing 100 episodes, and it took me 5 years with some big gaps because of other life stuff getting in the way. But I insisted on myself to finish it.
Yeah. It's important to finish things. The art of actually finishing a project, it's a skill that you have to develop like any other. Finishing a novel, finishing a story.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking before we started actually recording about a sword and sorcery story that I'm working on, that, man, it was really hard to finish. Well, it's the one that you did the analysis of.
I feel like Stan
episode.
Lee should pop up here and be like, hey, faithful listener, if you want to check that out, go back to episode 32, I think it was, whatever, story consultation with Nathaniel Webb. Look for that one.
Yeah, and we recorded that episode in December, and I only just finished the story a couple nights ago, because it was just, for some reason, the story was giving me a really hard time, but I wanted to finish it, and practicing completing things is really important. Yeah,
it is. I guess I sometimes think back to that project with a little bit of regret, just because I liked it, but it ultimately didn't get a big audience or push my life forward in any big ways. And I think sometimes about, like, what if I had the balls to go, you know what, this isn't working, I'm going to cut out episode 40 or whatever, instead of going all the way to 100. And then all that time and energy could have maybe gone down a better avenue. So I think that's a skill as well. But you're not wrong, the finishing thing, that's also very important.
Yeah, knowing when to fold is also a skill, and unfortunately, those two skills conflict with each other.
Yep. Oh well. So, you've already actually covered, I think. Yeah, we've already covered how did you find navigating your first slush pile, which is my next question. So, would you perhaps mind giving listeners who have been seduced by your siren call of cozy fantasy some reading recommendations beyond good old Lord of the Rings and Redwall?
Yeah.
And Wyngraf magazine, which I hear is pretty good.
Yes. Don't forget Wyngraf, cozyfantasy.com. So here's something interesting, is that cozy fantasy, or slice of life fantasy, actually it has been around for a while in a lot of other forms of media. There's like slice of life anime, and Studio Ghibli, a lot of those movies, like Kiki's Delivery Service, right? If I got that as a story, I'd publish the hell out of that, right? It's like a witch and a cat, and she delivers packages. I love it. But in prose, it's harder to pin down. But I would say, off the top of my head, Diana Wynne Jones, who wrote Howl's Moving Castle, actually, speaking of Studio Ghibli, so she wrote the novel Howl's Moving Castle, which is a great one. And then she also wrote duology, a book called Dark Lord of Dirkholm, which is basically like humorous, cozy, high fantasy, and then a sequel to that called Year of the Griffin. So those I would definitely recommend. The big one right now is a book called Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I don't know if you've heard about this on Twitter.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so this guy Travis is a fascinating dude. He was a video game designer. He was like designed the game Torchlight, if you ever played that. And then he quit that. He became an audiobook narrator. He was the narrator for the Cradle series by Will White, which is not really my thing. It's like progression fantasy, but absolutely huge. I mean, you know, he sold 1 billion of these books. So he's the narrator for that. And then last year during NaNoWriMo, he just banged out this book and self-published it. And it just has gone completely nuts. It's called Legends and Lattes. And it's about an orc who retires from adventuring and opens a coffee shop.
Which sounds wonderful, but also sounds exactly like what someone who wanted to make fun of cozy fantasy would come up with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you know, I mean, my God, we could do a whole podcast about this, but cozy fantasy is completely lacking in irony. It's very sincere, and that's something that I find very, very refreshing about it. Is it's, you know, there's no self-mockery in it at all.
And no ironic distance, right? Which can make it harder to care about what's going on.
Exactly. I mean, it's all about sincerely caring about these characters. And honestly, I mean, this book is like, you know, some people would hear that description and be like, this sounds like the most boring thing ever, but it's this little slice of life thing. It's short. It's like 62,000 words or something. So it's a quick read, but man, I mean, I couldn't put it down.
You know what? When you're telling me about that, it really makes me think of a lot of stuff I've heard about and seen on Tumblr and so on. Coffee shop AU, like fanfic stuff. Would you say there's any overlap between?
Oh gosh, if I had any idea what that was, I could answer this question very intelligently.
Oh, fair enough. Well, in a nutshell, I'm no
Coffee Shop
expert.
AU?
I'm no expert, but it's essentially like Coffee Shop AU is like alternate universe, and it's just like a very popular thing where people will be like, you know, I really like Tony Stark and the Avengers when they're saving the world from Jim Jam, whatever. You know, the famous Avengers villain, Jim Jam. He's terrifying. Anyway, but I would like to see them just like hanging out and talking about their lives and perhaps a coffee shop.
Yeah, I would guess that there's probably a lot of overlap there.
Perhaps in audiences, if not necessarily storytelling, because I mean, obviously not everything is Legends and Lattes, which, you know.
But here's the thing. I mean, this is what this is telling us, that there is a huge audience for this. Like Legends and Lattes, I mean, the dude, you know, he's hit a bunch of bestseller lists on Amazon. It got picked up by Tor, he just announced. They're going to re-release it. You know, he's got an editor with them and everything. And like, you know, he banged this out in November last year, bought some art and self-pubbed it. And, you know, and people are going nuts for it. And to be fair, it's a great book. I mean, he deserves every ounce of the success. I truly mean that. Like, I absolutely ate this book up. But there is an audience for this cozy fantasy stuff, these crazy kids with their cozy fantasy.
Well, there you
go.
But
people want it.
Yeah, and as far as him just banging it out or whatever, like, I think of webcomics, just because that's a world I'm a little more familiar with in some ways, where a lot of artists will say, you know, it's funny, the stuff I put a lot of time and energy into trying to make the perfect thing did okay, maybe, or flopped even, and the thing I just like banged out over a weekend did huge numbies. And so I think there's something.
Did they call them numbies?
Pardon me?
Did they call them numbies?
No, that's me having a brainworm because I really listen to a podcast where they say that a lot called Anime Sickos, where they barely talk about anime. It's just sort of about the world. It's quite funny. But anyway, they'll talk about like, got to make the numbies go up when they're talking about downloads or likes on a tweet or something. Nice. And now it's just like in my lexicon. But yeah, it's this kind of thing where if someone can just kind of relax and not over outline and over try to perfect something, then that sometimes will make you create the thing that, you know, makes the numbies go up.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and when I say, he banged it out in NaNoWriMo, I don't mean that dismissively at all. You know,
I could tell you didn't, but I thought it'd be good to sort of address.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, but there's a lot of truth in that when you find the story that's right for you to tell, not always, sometimes it's, you know, painful and takes 6 months to write a 8,000 word sword and sorcery tale. But, you know, sometimes, you just hit that and you're like, oh, right, this is what I should be writing. And then it just comes out, you know, and then it resonates with people.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're getting on the end here. I know you've said this before, but I feel like you can never say it enough. When does issue 1 come out, and where should people go to buy it, to follow the magazine online and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so issue 1 comes out May 1st, and the best place you can go is wyngraf.com, Wyngraf.com. Pre-orders as of today, digital pre-orders for the ebook edition are open. So you can go right now. I don't know when this podcast is going
today
to
is
come out.
April 7th, by the way, to give people...
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Today is April 7th, by the way, just to give people a framework for you finishing that story. But also, I don't know currently as of recording exactly when this is going up, but it will, I think early May is my goal, somewhere in the first 2 weeks.
Oh, perfect.
So definitely the magazine by this point will be out. You can buy it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so in that case, you can either go to the website, or if you just go straight to Amazon, it'll be up there. There's an ebook, and there's also a physical print edition, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's only on Amazon right now. That was a decision I made partially just to save my sanity from trying to deal with other distributors, other print-on-demand services, that kind of thing. And it's also just a margins thing. I mean, it's the horrible truth that Amazon, if you promise that your thing will only be on Amazon, they'll let you have more of your money. So I did make that deal with old Jeff Bezos. That may change in the future. The plan right now, and what I've told my authors, is it's going to be Amazon exclusive for 90 days, because that's, they do by quarters to be in like the Kindle Select program and all that stuff. And so it should be on Kindle Unlimited as well. If you're a subscriber to that, you'll be able to read it for free. But 90 days on that. And then my plan is then to remove it from Kindle Select program, which means my margins will go way down. But at that point, then the authors will be able to sell reprint rights if they want to. They can share their story. They can do whatever they want with it. Their contract with me essentially will be over at that point. And so then maybe we'll look into selling PDFs direct or something. I don't know. I've got ideas, but nothing solid yet.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, as we're talking, there were still several weeks out from the magazine actually being released. You've got time to think about things.
Exactly. God only knows what's going to happen from now until then. But yeah, so right now, either go to wyngraf.com, or you can just go straight to Amazon, search for Wyngraf, and it should come up and you can buy it.
And if you were like, oh, they spoke too fast and I don't feel like rewinding because I hate rewinding, I will link all of that stuff again in the show notes and the blog post and everything.
Yeah, I talk fast. Oh, and the other thing that I got to say, though, is if you don't want to spend money, every Friday we're posting free flash fiction. And that's free for you. It's not free for me. I'm paying all the writers at the same 1 cent per word rate as I do for the magazine. But every Friday, 1 or 2 stories go up. Flash Fiction Friday. It's totally catchy and easy to say, and I didn't just screw it up. And I love this also because it gives me the ability to give a lot of different authors a chance. I'm paying at the same rate as the magazine, but it's, stuff that's shorter, stuff that, maybe if it were an 8,000 word story, I wouldn't want to spend the time editing it, but it's 1,000 words, so I can edit this and try to polish it, work with the writer to get it polished, and we just put a ton of stuff out there that just maybe wouldn't get picked up elsewhere, and just give a lot of people a chance and kind of just see what people like.
And also from an editorial standpoint, it might get you some authors who are kind of busy or don't want to go whole hog on a short story, but they're like, I could do 1,000 words. I got time for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Yeah. And honestly, that may end up being me. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I hope so, man.
My immediate reaction was, I could do that when you
exactly. Yeah, you can write 1,000 words. And it doesn't have to be 1,000 words. I mean, I published one that was 24 words. Called Veli the Devil. It was one of the first ones we published, and I paid 24 cents for it.
I like to imagine that you just with like Two-Face or something exaggeratedly flipped a quarter that just flew through the sky, landing in the pocket of the author.
Yes, and then I took 1 penny back from her.
Yeah, and then you were like, okay, come on. I'm not making money over here.
So that's every Friday, and we're submissions are always open for that too. So if you're a writer and you're listening to this, check it out, because I'm always reading flash fiction. If I like it, I'll buy it. It'll go up in a couple of weeks, kind of thing, which has been also super, super fun. I mean, just reading all these little stories, I love it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time to talk about this today. It's been the balm of Gilead to have a nice chat at the end of what's been a long day about stuff that I find very interesting. So thank you. Yeah,
thank you so much for having me, Oliver.
Yeah, no worries. All right, people, go check it out. You got the marching orders, links are all on the thing. And at Wyngraf on Twitter, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we are on Twitter, Wyngraf and Twitter. And that's it. No Facebook, no Instagram, nothing like that. I got to save my sanity somehow.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Especially because of Facebook's whole pay to let your, more than 1/10 of your followers see your thing.
Oh, it's horrible.
Garbage.
Yeah, it's awful. I tried to have an author page for myself on there, and it's just useless.
Yeah, my author page on there, Bracken Books, is not. I'll be honest. Apologies to anyone listening who follows it, but you're not going to get the best of me from that. I just have an automated thing for the podcast to go up in there because I actually experimented a little bit with the pay for promo thing in the summer. And I won't get into the numbers right now because we're wrapping up, but it sucks. Listener, it
Yeah.
sucks.
I tried paying for Amazon advertising for my self-published novel, and it was just a money hole.
Yeah, it's no good. But that's another subject. What is good is Wyngraf. Go check it out. Links in the description of the podcast.
Yeah. Wyngraf.com, cozyfantasy.com.
Yes, cozyfantasy.com. The easier one to type, perhaps.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, man. Bye.
Thanks, Oliver.
So I'm Writing a Novel features original music by Gloria Guns and is hosted by yours truly, Oliver Brackenbury. If you'd like to submit a question, then please email it to soimwritinganovel@gmail.com. Bonus points if you record yourself and send me an MP3 I can cut into the show. Doesn't have to be fancy. Using your phone is fine. Just keep it clear and concise. You can also holler at the show on Twitter. Look for @so_writing. That's @so_writing. Please consider sharing the show with anybody who might like it, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and checking out patreon.com/soimwritinganovel. Patrons get to be thanked in the final novel, listen to episodes of the podcast a week early, and even enjoy a bonus podcast called So I Wrote a Novel, where I read and comment on chapters of previous works, starting with my first novel, Junkyard Leopard. Thanks for hanging out with me, and Nathaniel, and I'll see you soon.